one, wasn't it? What's the history of celiac disease?
So celiac disease has probably been around for a long, long time. And in the late 1800s, people started to put together the connections between cereals and the symptoms. But it wasn't really until the early 50s or late 40s, early 50s, 1940s, 1950s, in the aftermath of World War II, a paediatrician from the Netherlands put things very clearly or closely together in terms of cereals or foods and cereals and the connection. And that was a time, I understand, where there was lots of restrictions on foods, and some of the European countries had bread drops, so they didn't have access to bread for periods of time, and then bread would be delivered from an aeroplane. And then, so they'd noticed that people got sick when they had exposure to bread, and then they got better when they weren't having the bread, for example, and they started to put those things together. And at that point, access to checking the surface of the bowel wasn't available. And prior to those sort of dietary changes or establishing those connections, celiac disease could be a very nasty condition. Sometimes medicines like steroids were used to treat it. Sometimes it was even fatal in terms of the nutritional consequences. But with the work through the early 50s, then started to move to a gluten-free diet. And then testing platforms in terms of being able to look at the surface of the bowel evolved with endoscopic techniques in the 60s and 70s. But from that time, there's been a whole series of different antibodies that have been available and used in terms of trying to detect antibody responses in someone with celiac disease.
The blood tests.
The blood tests,
right.
Yes. And one of the tests that was done initially, even before endoscopy, was called a Crosby capsule, which was sort of swallowing a little device on a string, and then that little capsule was activated and moved to the small bowel, and then it took a little bite, and then you pull the capsule back up again.
Oh, that sounds horrific.
I'd never, so some of my colleagues, the people I started working with when I finished my training had been doing that for years in terms of a way to look for celiac disease, but that very quickly became outdated with endoscopy and being able to look at the surface of the bowel directly and take focused biopsies.
So the biopsy itself is taken as a way to measure the villi, is that?
Exactly.
And that's what
yes.
the Crosby capsules did as well. They took a little sample.
Yeah. Yes. So the idea is to look at the surface of the bowel.
Mm.
So we know the normal structure has lots of little fingers sticking up like a really thick shag pile carpet, and they help to give lots of surface area, lots of area for the goodies to be absorbed from our foods, as well as lots of other functions as well. But with celiac disease, typically those villi are short or stunted, and there's other changes beneath the surface. So with the biopsy, one can look at the structure. Is it normal? Is it altered? Are there features that go along with celiac disease? And that can be graded in terms of the severity of damage, so how much, whether those villi are completely absent or whether they're just abbreviated or shortened. And obviously also making sure that there's no other processes that are going along as well that could sometimes contribute to damage in the small bowel that might look like celiac disease. So giardia as an example, or allergy that might lead to some parts of that damage that could look a bit like celiac disease.
In terms of the villi being stunted, is that so? That's what giardia does as well.
Well, it can lead to some damage in the small bowel, okay, but it doesn't have the whole picture of celiac disease. But what I'm meaning is, it's not just. I mean, is the small bowel look normal? Does it look like celiac disease, or could there be other things going on instead that could be contributing to that person's symptoms?